The night was supposed to be quiet, but when the wind shifted, Mason Cole heard it 3 metallic chimes beneath the floor. His dog, Rook, froze, ears locked, growling at something unseen. Mason told himself it was nothing, just wind, pipes, memory. But the rhythm was too steady, too human. 3 beats. Pause. 3 again. His pulse matched it. He pried up the plank, expecting dust. Instead, cold air rose from a steel hatch hidden below. Rook stepped back, trembling. Mason leaned closer, whispering to no one, "Who's down there?" Then the chime answered, one last time. Morning crept into the harbor slow and gray, the kind of light that didn't warm anything, just exposed it. Mason Cole stood on the porch of the cottage, mug in hand, watching mist coil off the water. The boards still held the night's chill, and somewhere below them waited the sealed hatch he'd uncovered hours earlier. He hadn't opened it again. Not yet. Rook sat beside him, posture straight, eyes scanning the shoreline like a sentry on duty. When the wind rattled a loose buoy chain, the dog didn't flinch. Mason envied that kind of steadiness. The cottage was his Aunt Nora's, half rebuilt, half forgotten. Cedar shingles patched with metal, a sagging dock, a radio antenna long snapped by storms. She'd left him the property and nothing else. No letters, no debts, no explanations. Just the cottage, the silence, and the deed, signed 2 months before her sudden heart failure. For Mason, silence was both cure and punishment. After the war, the VA doctors called it hypervigilance, as if it were something clinical, not holy. He called it listening to everything. The way gulls fell quiet before rain, the hum behind a wall socket, the faint tick of his watch when adrenaline spiked. That listening had saved lives once. Then it had ended one. He took a sip of coffee gone cold. Out past the breakwater, construction cranes rose from the fog like skeletons. The town of Port Candle was reinventing itself, condos for retirees, shops for tourists. And standing behind every permit was Victor Laird, the developer who wanted this stretch of coast cleared. The locals had warned Mason. "He'll make you an offer," they'd said, "and if you don't take it, he'll find another way." But Mason wasn't here to sell. He was here to rebuild, to hammer noise into something that didn't echo. Rook's ears twitched. The dog padded to the porch rail and sniffed the air. A truck door slammed somewhere down the road. Mason saw movement through the mist, a white SUV with a magnetic city emblem that looked too fresh, too temporary. He set the mug aside. The man who stepped out wore a bright orange vest and a clipboard. "Morning," he called, too cheerful for the weather. "Code inspection. Routine check for gas leaks." Mason frowned. "Didn't schedule one." The man smiled wider, eyes flicking toward the cottage foundation. "New safety program, sir. Mind if I—" Rook barked once, low and hard. The man stopped mid-sentence. "Big fella," he said, pretending calm. "Retired K9, Mason replied. "Doesn't like strangers who lie." A brief pause, then the man raised a hand as if to wave off tension. "No harm done. We'll reschedule." He turned fast, boots crunching over gravel. The SUV's tires spun, leaving the drive. Mason watched the taillights vanish into fog, then looked down at Rook. "Guess the program's off," he muttered. Inside, the cottage smelled of pine dust and damp metal. The living room was small, one wall lined with old nautical charts, another with photos of his aunt beside fishing boats. He'd patched the ceiling himself, every nail measured, every seam sealed. Control was a religion here. Anything unpredictable was danger. He knelt near the section of floor where the hatch lay hidden again. The plank fit snug, like it had never been lifted. No sound now, no chimes, no ticking. Yet a faint hum lingered in the air, just below hearing, like a thought that wouldn't leave. Rook nosed the edge once, then retreated to his bed. Mason exhaled. "We leave it," he said aloud, more to himself than to the dog. For now. He tried to lose the morning in work, replacing a cracked window pane, sanding the porch rail, stacking firewood, but the rhythm wouldn't hold. Every scrape of sandpaper came back in threes. Shh, pause, like the signal under the floor, echoing through his muscles. At noon he drove into town for supplies. The road curved along the cliffs, where waves exploded against basalt in slow motion. On the radio, the weather report promised gale warnings within 36 hours. His fingers tightened on the steering wheel. Storms didn't bother him. Countdowns did. Port Candle looked freshly painted but tired underneath. Gift shops, an old cannery-turned cafe, and a sheriff's office that doubled as a post drop. When Mason stepped inside for his mail, the deputy at the counter froze mid-stamp. Cole, right? The vet up by the point? Yeah. The deputy slid an envelope across the counter property tax notice and cleared his throat. Word is Laird's crew wants that strip for the access road. You might want to keep your doors locked. I already do. Oh. Outside, two fishermen paused mid-conversation when they saw him. One offered a polite nod, the other didn't bother. Mason was used to that. Veterans brought their own kind of weather wherever they went, clouds people pretended not to see. He loaded the truck bed with lumber and gas cans, ignoring the ache in his left shoulder that flared when pressure dropped. On the way back, rain began a fine, slanting drizzle that blurred the edges of everything. By the time he reached the cottage, fog had rolled in thick as smoke. Rook met him at the door, tail stiff, nose wet. The generator light blinked once, then went dark. Power cut. Mason glanced toward the breakers. All fine. He crouched, tracing the main line to the outer wall. The insulation was cleanly sliced, not chewed cut. Rook growled low. Mason followed his gaze through the window. Across the property line, a shadow moved quick, deliberate before disappearing behind the trees. He felt the old instinct rise, that controlled surge of readiness. Not panic, not yet. He grabbed the flashlight and scanned the yard. Only fog answered. But the air smelled different now. Ozone and salt, same scent as beneath the hatch. Rook pressed against his leg, silent. Together they stood in the dim porch light, the wind picking up again from the east. For the first time since returning, Mason realized the cottage wasn't as empty as he'd believed. Something down there, or someone knew his name, had waited for him to come home and was already moving the pieces. He closed the door gently, latched it twice, and whispered to Rook, "We'll see what they're digging for when the storm hits." Outside, the fog thickened, swallowing the last of the daylight. Inside, the silence hummed, like a wire stretched too tight, ready to sing. Rain came heavy through the night, hammering the roof until dawn. Mason barely slept. Every time the wind shifted, he thought he heard the 3-beat chime again, muted, patient, somewhere beneath his feet. By morning, the storm had eased to drizzle, leaving the air thick and metallic. He brewed coffee, fed Rook, then knelt by the hatch. His breath fogged on the cold boards. "Still quiet," he murmured. Rook didn't agree. The shepherd's tail was low, ears forward, muscles drawn tight. Mason pushed himself up and grabbed his jacket. "Fine. We get answers the old-fashioned way." And, outside, the shoreline glimmered under low cloud. Seaweed and driftwood cluttered the sand like wreckage. Across the bay, bulldozers were already crawling over what used to be the fishing pier. New scaffolds, same old corruption. He walked the property line, tracing boot prints that weren't his broad soles. Deep treads, fresh despite the rain. They led toward the fence where the insulation cable had been cut. At the edge of the brush, he found cigarette ash still dry. Whoever had stood there hadn't been gone long. Rook sniffed the ground, then lifted his head toward the tree line and gave one short, certain bark. Mason's grip tightened on the flashlight in his pocket. "All right," he said softly. "We're being watched." The road into town wound past the old shipyard, half-dismantled cranes, puddles shining with oil rainbows. Mason slowed when he saw the black SUV parked by the gate. Victor Laird stood beside it, immaculate as ever. Gray hair slicked back, umbrella untouched despite the drizzle. "Morning, Mr. Cole," Laird called, smiling like a politician caught rehearsing empathy. "Did my guys wake you last night?" Mason rolled down the window halfway. "That your idea of an inspection crew?" Laird's smile didn't fade. "Miscommunication. You know how subcontractors are. I came myself to apologize and to make an offer." He tapped a folder against his palm. "Full buyout of your property at triple market value. You'll be free by next week." "I'm already free." "Come now," Laird said, voice smooth as rain on glass. "This stretch is unstable, full of sinkholes, corroded utilities. You'd be doing yourself a favor." "Aye." Rook leaned from the passenger seat and growled a deep, resonant warning that made the air feel smaller. Laird's eyes flicked toward the dog. "Still got your partner, I see." "Still better instincts than most men," Mason said. For the first time, Laird's expression hardened. "Careful what you dig up out there. Some things were buried for good reason." "Yeah," Mason said quietly. "Like truth." Laird snapped the folder shut. "You've got till tomorrow. After that, the county steps in. Safety code. You won't win that fight." The SUV door slammed, tires hissing on wet gravel as it left. Mason watched it disappear in the mirror, jaw clenched until his teeth ached. Back at the cottage, the wind had shifted again offshore now, carrying the smell of diesel and distant lightning. Rook paced the porch, unsettled. Mason stacked lumber under the awning, but his hands moved on autopilot. Every sound reminded him of Kandahar. The hum before mortars, the hollow quiet after. He tried to reason it through. A hatch under the floor. A signal with structure. A developer desperate to dig. It couldn't all be coincidence. Inside, he laid out the materials on the table. Map of Port Candle, his aunt's old ledger, the property survey. At first glance, they were harmless, but the ledger had a patterned dates marked with small fish symbols beside tide heights. He'd assumed it was her fishing record. Now he wasn't so sure. Rook hopped onto the bench beside him, pressing close. Mason rubbed the dog's neck absently, eyes tracing the symbols. Each fish mark lined up with the town's old storm warning log. Same nights. Same intervals as the 3-beat chime. His stomach tightened. Nora hadn't been tracking weather, she'd been tracking broadcasts. He flipped open the map. Near the shoreline, a faint pencil line extended from the cottage toward the derelict pier ending at a small cross marked Vault 2. His finger hovered over it. "You knew," he whispered, staring at the name, Nora C., in faded ink. "You kept something here." Rook gave a short whine. The sound wasn't fear, it was waiting. Mason stood. "All right, boy, let's see what she left." They set out before dusk, cutting through knee-high grass toward the pier. Rain had stopped, but thunder grumbled somewhere inland. The wooden slats groaned under Mason's boots. Beneath them, the tide whispered through barnacled pilings. Halfway down, Rook halted. The dog's nose pressed against a rusted crate wedged between two beams. He pawed once, claws scraping metal. Mason crouched. The crate was bolted shut, covered in algae, and stamped with faded military markings. USENG, Corpse 1959. "Oh, not exactly fishing gear," he muttered. He worked the bolts loose with his multi-tool. Inside were soaked papers sealed in plastic, tide charts, radio frequencies, and a single black and white photo. His aunt, decades younger, stood beside two uniformed men, one of them unmistakably Victor Laird. Mason's breath caught. "You were there," he said to the empty pier. The wind rose, carrying a faint clang from the harbor bell, 3 slow tones, the same rhythm as before. The dog barked once, facing inland, toward the dark silhouette of the cottage. Mason turned, the photo still in his hand. Through the fog, a light flickered from his window, then went out. Someone was inside. He felt the calm that always came before violence. Not rage, not fear, focus. "Stay low," he whispered. Rook's body flattened, eyes locked on the distant glow. Mason started back along the pier, every step measured. Rain began again, harder now, erasing footprints behind them. By the time they reached the yard, the light was gone. The front door stood ajar. No sound but the steady drip of rain from the eaves. Mason entered first, flashlight sweeping corners. Nothing moved. But on the table, his aunt's ledger was open to a new page. He hadn't turned one blank line, freshly written in shaky ink. "If you hear the signal, don't trust the man who built it." He froze. The ink was still damp. Rook growled, low and long, facing the floor. The chime began again beneath their feet, 3 beats, pause, 3 again louder than ever, as if whatever waited below had just heard its name. Mason exhaled slowly. "Looks like we're not done yet, boy." The storm arrived 12 hours early. By dusk, wind howled through Port Candle like a warning. Mason sat at the table, flashlight trembling beside a half-cold mug. Under the floor, the 3-beat chime pulsed again, soft, deliberate, counting time that only it understood. Rook stood stiff by the hearth, eyes fixed on the boards. Each note seemed to reach through the dog before touching Mason's chest. He opened Nora's ledger. The last line, fresh ink, still damp, read, "If you hear the signal, don't trust the man who built it." Victor Laird. It had to be. The radio tower was dead, phone out, storm swelling. He told himself to wait for daylight, but the rhythm below kept answering his pulse. He grabbed the crowbar. "Stay close, Rook." The first plank came free with a groan. Cold, mineral air rushed up, heavy with brine and rust. Beneath lay a steel hatch scarred black, bolted shut for decades. He pried each screw loose until the hinge screamed and the lid gave way. A narrow ladder dropped into darkness. Rook descended first, obedient yet tense. Mason followed, flashlight beam slicing through dust. The space was smaller than a bunker, larger than a secret. Shelves lined the walls, batteries, wire reels, tagged with numbers half erased by salt. On the far table waited a metal case marked U.S. Signal Engineering Division, Whisper 9. Nora's handwriting filled his mind, the same name scrawled in the ledger's margins. He touched the casing. It hummed faintly, alive. He traced the power cable to an old battery array. Instinct took over. One twist, and the chime died. Silence slammed into the room so suddenly it rang. Then click. A reel-to-reel player whirred once, crackling through static. "If you're hearing this," Nora's voice said, calm but urgent, "you followed the signal. That means he's looking for it too." Mason froze. Laird built Whisper 9 to move money relief funds, defense contracts, through dummy frequencies. When the project shut down, he buried it here. I couldn't destroy it. The proofs in the third crate beneath the pier. The keys, the tide clock. The tape ended with a soft, mechanical sigh. Mason's stomach turned. His aunt hadn't left him a home. She'd left him evidence. Rook's ears twitched. He growled toward the ladder. A faint scrape overhead. Bootsteps. Then the hatch slammed shut. "Hey!" Mason shouted, climbing fast. The bolt slid home from above. Silence. Only the storm's weight pressing on the roof. He forced air through his lungs, scanning. A vent shaft ran along the wall, narrow, but open. He ripped the grate with the crowbar. "Go, boy." Rook crawled first. Mason followed, shoulders grinding against damp concrete. 20 feet later, moonlight filtered through rusted mesh. One kick, and they spilled out behind the cottage into wet grass. Rain lashed his face. Tire tracks cut through the mud, fresh, deep. Someone had been waiting for him to go down there. He looked at the porch clock glowing faintly through the window. 11:40 p.m. High tide in 2 hours. Whatever Nora hid under the pier would be gone soon. He shoved the crowbar into his belt. "We move now." They cut through dunes and seagrass toward the harbor. The pier loomed ahead, skeletal against flashes of lightning. Waves smashed its pilings, flinging spray high enough to taste. Rook trotted in front, nose low, tail stiff. Mason's breath smoked in the wind. Every step forward felt like pushing through years of unfinished orders. Halfway down the pier, the dog stopped. He pawed at a half-buried metal crate wedged between beams. The lid was rusted but intact. Mason pried it open with shaking hands. Inside, plastic-sealed folders, tide charts, and a single brass key stamped PC09. Same letters as the bell on the harbor. He flipped open one folder. Bank transfers, coordinates, signatures. At the bottom, Victor Laird. Thunder cracked close enough to rattle the boards. Rook barked once, sharp. Headlights sliced the fog behind them. A black SUV rolled to a stop at the dunes. 2 men climbed out, flashlights sweeping the pier. "Search under there," one barked. Mason slid the files inside his coat and crouched. The dog crouched with him, breath steady, waiting for command. Boots clanged above. One beam of light passed inches from Mason's face. He whispered, "Stay." A wave surged, soaking their legs. The tide was rising fast, faster than forecast. Another minute and the lower pier would be gone. When one guard leaned over the edge, Mason flung a loose plank upward. It crashed against the railing. Rook exploded from hiding, sprinting through the spray. The men shouted, flashlights jerking after him. Gunfire cracked 2 short bursts lost in thunder. Mason sprinted the opposite direction, keeping low. He reached the shore ladder and slid into the shallows, icy water to his waist. Rook's dark shape reappeared ahead, circling back through the surf. "Come on." They reached the truck breathless. Behind them, the men's flashlights darted wildly, then retreated toward the SUV. The engine roared and vanished up the road. Mason leaned against the door, soaked, adrenaline burning. Rook shook off water beside him, chest heaving. He pulled the brass key from his pocket and stared at it. PC09, the harbor bell, the tide clock, Nora's clue. The storm roared across the bay, rain coming sideways now. Lightning turned the waves white. "Everything you warned me about," he said quietly to the empty air. "It's all still here." Rook pressed against his leg, grounding him. He looked toward the cottage on the hill, small, dark, defiant against the storm. Someone had locked him underground to keep this secret buried. But the signal was still active, and now he held proof that could ruin Laird. Mason turned the truck toward the ridge, tires spinning through mud. "We finish it," he muttered. "No more running." The tide bell tolled once, twice, 3 times exact rhythm of the signal. The wind swallowed the sound as they climbed the hill, a man and a dog carrying a truth the ocean had tried its best to drown. And somewhere, miles out on the black water, a red light blinked on a floating buoy, 3 short, 3 long, alive again. The power cut out just after 3 a.m. Wind howled through the seams of the cottage. Mason lit a lantern, its glow trembling over scattered papers. Rook stood at the door, rigid, staring at the tide clock on the wall. Its hand wasn't ticking, it was pulsing. 3 short clicks, then 3 long, the same rhythm that haunted them since the hatch. Mason pulled the brass key PC09 from his pocket and turned it in the clock. A faint mechanism shifted, gears grinding backward. Then a tone bled through the cottage speaker, the ghost frequency. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. He grabbed his handheld radio, tuned through static until the pattern sharpened. A mechanical voice repeated coordinates. Cinder Point Lighthouse. His aunt's note returned to him, "Don't trust the man who built it." Laird owned that lighthouse. He stuffed the key and notebook into his jacket, snapped on a flashlight. "Let's move, Rook." Rain lashed sideways as Mason's truck cut along the coastal road. The radio hissed alive. "You shouldn't have opened it." Laird's voice. Calm, cold, too close. Mason killed the volume. The signal wasn't local radio, it was the transmitter talking back. Rook whined softly. Mason tightened his grip on the wheel. "Then, let's finish the conversation." The lighthouse loomed through the fog, its glass shattered, floodlights sweeping the cliffs. 2 trucks idled by the base, silhouettes moving inside. Laird's crew. Mason parked down the slope, rain soaking through his collar. He crouched low, studying movement. Rook waited beside him, breath steady, eyes locked. He whispered, "Circle right. Distract." Rook vanished into the dark, paws silent on wet gravel. Seconds later, a guard-cursed flashlight dropped, followed by a shout. Mason sprinted forward, crowbar in hand, boots slipping through mud. He hit the door as thunder cracked. It swung open. Inside smelled of oil and electricity. The Whisper 9 transmitter sat glowing in the center, cables snaking up to a jury-rigged antenna. Laird stood beside it, headset on, lips moving. When he saw Mason, his face hardened. "You couldn't leave it buried. You murdered my aunt to hide this. She died protecting the wrong truth," Laird said. "You think wars end? They just go private." He turned a dial. The machine whined, lights pulsing red. "In 10 minutes, the ledger's gone forever." Mason stepped closer. "Then I stop it now." "Cut that line, and the failsafe triggers," Laird snapped. "Everything uploads at once, no way to control it." Mason stared at the timer on the panel. 9, 12. A countdown. Rook re-entered, wet fur slicked to muscle. Behind him, a guard staggered in, bleeding from a forearm bite. Laird raised his pistol. "Back off, Cole." Mason moved first. He slammed the crowbar through the main conduit. Sparks exploded. The timer froze at 8-2. Laird fired. The round punched through a pipe. Steam roared across the room. The machine screamed 3 short tones, 3 long, then the ghost frequency spread through every speaker. Rook crouched low, barking once, ready. Mason dived behind the console, coughing through steam. "Rook, down!" Lightning flashed through the shattered roof, revealing Laird at the controls, trying to override. Mason lunged, wrenched the pistol away, and smashed the keyboard with his elbow. The lights flickered, then steadied no longer red, but white. The backup transmitter had switched bands. The evidence Nora encoded was going out. Laird stared at the monitors. "You fool! It's sending everything." "Exactly," Mason said. He yanked the final power cable. The generator blew with a crack of ozone. Darkness swallowed the room. When his vision cleared, Laird was gone. Only the storm remained, and the faint, distant echo of the signal still pulsing through Mason's radio. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. He looked down at Rook, soaked and trembling but alive. "The ghost frequency's still broadcasting," Mason said quietly. "Somewhere else." The dog's ears flicked toward the sea, as if he already knew where. Mason exhaled, gripping the brass key until it bit his palm. "Then that's where we go." By dawn, the storm had thinned to fog. The sea glowed dull silver beneath the cliffs, waves folding against rock with a steady, exhausted rhythm. Mason and Rook stood by the truck, both soaked, both wired from the night. The handheld radio still whispered in static bursts. Every few minutes, the ghost frequency pulsed again, 3 short, 3 long, 3 short, each echo weaker, but leading north along the coast. Mason traced the map spread across the hood. If it's rebroadcasting, it's bouncing from a second relay. Ridge B, he muttered. The backup site. Rook's tail lifted slightly. Mason packed fast radio, flare gun, rope, thermos, and Nora's notebook. He tied the map under the wiper, checked the revolver's chamber. Let's end this, boy. The road to Ridge B wasn't on any modern chart. It wound through pine forest, turned ghost gray by fog, the path choked with moss and gravel. By noon, the truck could go no farther. He left it hidden beneath an overhang and continued on foot. The silence was unnatural. No birds, no wind, just Rook's breathing and Mason's boots crunching through wet soil. A mile in, Rook froze. His ears pivoted. Mason followed his gaze, something metallic, half buried under ferns. An old communications marker, rusted, stamped B12. They were close. Another 100 yards, and the ridge opened into a clearing. The trees bent away from it like something had burned the ground years ago. At its center stood a concrete bunker, doors cracked open, rust bleeding down its seams. Mason crouched, scanning. Tire tracks fresh. Someone beat us here. He raised his revolver and slipped inside. The corridor sloped down, narrow and damp. Rook followed close behind, silent except for low breaths. The beam of Mason's flashlight cut through dust and hanging cables. Halfway down, they heard voices, 2 men, arguing. Laird said, "Pull the drives and torch it." Not yet, the feed's still running. Mason flattened against the wall, listening. They were near the control room. He motioned to Rook, wait. Then he moved. He burst through the doorway, gun leveled. "Step away from that panel. You think wars end? They just go private." He turned a dial. The machine whined, lights pulsing red. In 10 minutes, the ledger's gone forever. Mason stepped closer. "Then I stop it now. Cut that line, and the failsafe triggers," Laird snapped. "Everything uploads at once, no way to control it." Mason stared at the timer on the panel. 9, 12. A countdown. Rook re-entered, wet fur slicked to muscle. Behind him, a guard staggered in, bleeding from a forearm bite. "It's not local," the nervous one said, trembling. "It's remote-linked now, satellite patch." Laird moved the control node off-grid. "Where?" "He didn't tell us." Mason stepped closer. "Guess again." The man's gaze flicked toward the back wall. A locked steel cabinet. Mason kicked it open inside. A live terminal blinked with coordinates. Ridge B wasn't the source. It was a relay. The final signal was going deeper, inland, an old military site marked Echo Array. He memorized the coordinates, then ripped the power conduit free. The transmitter shrieked once and went dark. "Out," he ordered. The men hesitated. "Now." They bolted past him, stumbling up the tunnel. Mason exhaled, then looked down at Rook. "Echo Array," he said quietly. "We finished there." But Rook wasn't looking at him anymore. His head was turned toward a side door, body stiff. He growled low. Mason stepped closer and pushed it open. The room beyond was small, lit by a single bulb. On the floor lay a cot, a set of medical crates, and a photograph pinned to the wall. Nora standing beside Laird, both younger, both in uniform. Across the bottom, handwritten in faded ink, "We built it to protect, not to profit." Mason's chest tightened. She helped design it. The ghost frequency hadn't started as corruption. It was meant as a failsafe to warn civilians if communications collapsed. Laird twisted it into something else, an invisible pipeline for stolen defense funds. Rook's growl deepened. Mason turned footsteps in the hall. Laird stepped through the fog, pistol drawn, raincoat clinging to his frame. "You never learned when to stop. You killed her." "She left me no choice," Laird said, voice flat. "She would have exposed us both. You hid behind her name." Laird smiled thinly. "And you're hiding behind hers." He raised the gun. Rook leapt first. The shot fired wild, hitting the wall. Laird stumbled back as Rook clamped onto his wrist, dragging him down. Mason kicked the weapon away and pressed his own barrel against Laird's throat. "Call off the relay." "Too late," Laird hissed. "It's self-cycling. Once it finishes, every file, every name erased, including yours. Then I make sure you stay to see it fail." Outside, thunder rolled again, closer this time. The storm hadn't died. It had circled back over the ridge. The lights flickered. Mason grabbed a bundle of cables and jammed them into the control terminal, shorting the circuit. The screens flared, then died. Smoke filled the room, acrid and bitter. Laird coughed violently, blood streaking his sleeve. "You don't even know what you've done." "Neither did you," Mason said. The ceiling groaned. Concrete dust rained down. The ridge was shifting. He yanked Laird to his feet, shoved him toward the exit. "Move!" They sprinted up the tunnel as the bunker began to collapse. Metal shrieked, the floor tilting under their feet. Rook stayed at Mason's side, barking through smoke. They burst into daylight as the ridge gave way behind them, a roar swallowing the bunker whole. For a moment, nothing but the sound of wind and falling debris. Mason dropped to one knee, coughing hard. Rook stood beside him, chest heaving, muzzle streaked with dust. He looked up at the ridge, a plume of smoke rising, the ghost frequency finally silent. Laird lay sprawled a few yards away, unconscious but alive. Mason holstered the gun and stared at the horizon. "Ridge B's gone," he murmured. "But if there's still a signal, it'll be Echo Array next." Rook gave a low bark, tail stiff, eyes on the north. Mason stood, muscles trembling, and wiped blood from his mouth. "Then that's where we go." The road to Echo Array was long, winding, and empty. Fog clung low over the forest, swallowing the horizon until everything looked drowned. Mason drove without headlights, following memory more than vision. The radio in the passenger seat hissed with bursts of static, the ghost frequency still pulsing somewhere beyond reach. Rook sat upright beside him, muzzle resting on the window frame, eyes fixed ahead. Every few minutes the dog let out a soft whine, not fear, but urgency. He could feel the pull, too. "You remember this route, don't you?" Mason muttered. The dog's tail thumped once against the seat. The Echo Array had once been a military relay hub sealed after the Cold War, abandoned for decades. Now, the signal had come home to where it was born. They reached the perimeter by dusk. The compound sat sunken in a valley of dead pines, surrounded by rusted fences and antenna towers leaning like gravestones. A single trailer hummed with generator noise near the gate. Mason parked the truck behind a ridge, shouldered his pack, and moved in low. Rook ghosted beside him, ears high, every motion silent. Through binoculars, Mason counted 3 men patrolling the outer fence, all armed, all wearing civilian gear. Not soldiers, but hired hands. Laird's cleanup crew. Mason's breath fogged in the cold air. He checked his revolver, then looked at Rook. "You take left. Quiet." The dog slipped into the shadows, vanishing between trees. Mason waited. 30 seconds. Then, a muffled grunt 1 guard down. Another stepped forward, confused, flashlight wavering. Mason moved fast, grabbing him from behind, silencing him with the edge of his arm. The man crumpled into the snow. Rook reappeared at his side, eyes gleaming. "Good work, partner." They crossed the fence through a torn section and entered the main yard. The satellite dishes above them loomed like giant rusted mirrors, reflecting moonlight in fractured arcs. The bunker entrance was sealed by a heavy steel door. Mason found the keypad's still functional battery light faintly glowing. He reached into Nora's notebook and flipped to a page marked Project Whisper, Access Protocols. A line of numbers was scrawled beneath. He entered them. The lock clicked. The door groaned open, air thick with dust and ozone. Inside, the walls were lined with racks of dead computers. But in the center of the control hall, one monitor still glowed pale green, alive, waiting. A man stood before it. Broad shoulders, gray hair slicked back. The voice that came through the storm hours ago. "Colonel Victor Laird," Mason said. Laird turned slowly, eyes hollow but sharp. "You don't understand what you're destroying. You built Whisper 9 to steal billions in relief funds. You used my aunt's designs as cover. She believed in containment," Laird said, stepping closer. "She wanted to protect the system, not expose it. The world isn't built on truth, Cole. It's built on control. Someone has to decide who sees what. And you made yourself that someone." Laird smiled faintly. "Someone had to." The monitor behind him flickered an interface counting down from 5 minutes. Uplink active. The ghost frequency wasn't a message anymore. It was an upload stream. Rook growled, muscles coiled. Mason's hand hovered over the revolver. "What's the upload?" "Names," Laird said simply. "Every black budget, every covert operation, every soldier buried under numbers. You shut this off, and the truth goes with it. You let it run, and the country burns." "So what's left?" Mason asked quietly. "Lie or chaos?" Laird tilted his head. "You decide. That's what command is." The words hit harder than Mason expected. For a second, the weight of his own past pressed down the failed missions, the orders he obeyed because he thought they mattered. He'd seen what blind obedience cost. He lowered the gun slightly. "You think this saves anyone?" Laird looked tired now, almost old. "It buys order. Without it, men like us have no home to come back to." Mason stared at the monitor. 5 minutes had become 2. He could almost hear Nora's voice beneath the static. "Truth without mercy becomes a weapon too." Rook barked once sharp, warning. Mason spun. One of Laird's men appeared in the doorway, rifle raised. Mason dove sideways as the shot tore through the console. Sparks exploded. The screen shattered. A wave of electric noise flooded the room, the ghost frequency screaming through every speaker. Laird shouted over the din, "It's done! You broke the failsafe." The lights stuttered, alarms wailing. Mason crawled to the side panel, tearing out wires, searching for the master cutoff. He found it buried under layers of conduit, a red switch marked purge. Laird saw it too. They locked eyes. Both men lunged. The switch flipped. A surge of white light filled the hall. For an instant, everything froze. Time, sound, breath. Then the floor trembled. Monitors went black. The hum died. The ghost frequency stopped. When silence returned, it was complete. Smoke coiled through the room. Mason pushed himself up, coughing, half deaf from the blast. Laird lay a few feet away, bleeding from a gash on his temple, still breathing. The monitor flickered once more, one final line of text before fading out. Transmission partial, data fragment saved. Rook padded forward, sniffing the air, ears still twitching to some echo only he could hear. Mason wiped dust from his face. It didn't all erase. "No," Laird whispered, voice cracked. "It never does." He looked up, eyes glassy. "Every war leaves ghosts, Cole. Yours just found a frequency." Mason stared at him for a long moment. Then he turned, grabbing Nora's notebook from the console. He slid it into his coat. "Then I'll decide what they say." Rook followed him toward the exit, limping slightly but alert. Outside, dawn was breaking pale over the ridge. The towers stood silent, coated in frost. Behind them, the bunker doors groaned as power drained away for good. Mason looked once more at the rising light, the horizon stretching wide and empty. "Let's go home, partner," he said softly. Rook wagged his tail once, then started down the hill, the ghost frequency finally quiet, but its echoes still alive in both their hearts. Snow began to fall again before nightfall. Soft flakes at first, then heavier, carried sideways by wind that tasted of iron and pine. Mason and Rook trudged through the woods in silence, leaving the burned-out echo array behind them. The air smelled of static and rust, a scent that would never wash out of memory. They reached the truck an hour after dark. The engine coughed, caught, and the headlights carved 2 pale tunnels through the storm. Mason's knuckles were raw, his jacket torn, and his mind ran circles around the same thought the upload hadn't erased everything. Somewhere, a fragment of Whisper 9 still lived. Rook shifted in the seat, eyes on him. "I know," Mason said quietly. "It's not over." The radio crackled to life, faint but deliberate. 3 short tones, 3 long, 3 short. The ghost frequency, again, weaker now, like a dying heartbeat. Mason felt a chill crawl through him. It wasn't broadcasting from the array. It was coming from home. The lodge. He pressed the accelerator. By midnight, the truck slid to a stop at the foot of the hill. The storm had turned vicious. Snow hammered the windshield. Branches clawed at the glass. Through the blur, the shape of the lodge appeared, windows glowing faintly. He'd left it dark. "Stay sharp, boy." They climbed the porch steps. The front door stood ajar, snow drifting across the threshold. The fire inside burned low, orange light flickering over overturned chairs and scattered papers. Mason entered slow, revolver drawn. Rook padded beside him, muscles tight. The radio transmitter on the table blinked red, active. Someone had been here. From the hallway came a sound, metal striking wood, steady, deliberate. Mason followed it past the kitchen and down to the cellar door, the same hatch he and Rook had opened that first night. Now, it stood wide. He descended, lantern in hand. The smell of cold earth filled his lungs. At the bottom stood Laird. His coat was gone, his face pale, blood drying at his temple. He leaned against the Whisper 9 casing, pistol hanging loose in one hand. "You should have stayed away," Laird said. His voice was hoarse, stripped of command. Mason aimed. "I thought you died up there." "Not yet." Laird's smile was faint. You think you destroyed it? The system was designed to survive its own death. You cut the head, the body remembers. Mason's eyes flicked to the transmitter light still pulsing behind him. You turned this place into the backup. Oh, it's the only one left, Laird said, and it's finishing what we started. Rook growled, low, warning. Mason stepped forward. You could still end it. Laird looked tired, not defeated, just empty. You end it. You erase proof of what she died for. She died trying to stop you. She died building it. He shot back. You think I twisted her legacy? No. She saw the world exactly as I did, flawed, reckless. She just didn't have the stomach to finish. Arc. Mason tightened his grip on the revolver. Then I'll finish it for her. Laird raised his pistol. So will I. 2 shots exploded almost at once. Glass shattered. Light flared. Then silence heavy. Final. Laird slumped against the console, blood seeping through his shirt. The transmitter sparked once, then dimmed. Mason dropped to one knee, breath shaking. His side burned, grazed, not fatal. He pressed a hand to the wound and looked at Rook. It's done, he whispered. But the dog wasn't looking at him. He was staring at the console ears forward, tail rigid. The signal light flickered again, faint, then steady. No voice this time. Just the sound of breathing slow, human, recorded long ago. Then Nora's voice came through, soft and calm. If you're hearing this, it means you found him, and it means he couldn't stop himself. Mason froze. There will always be another command, another secret, another man convinced he's saving the world. Don't become him, Mason. Don't keep digging. The recording ended. Rook pressed close, nudging his arm. Mason let the revolver drop. The metal clattered against stone. For the first time in years, he felt his hands tremble. He stared at the console, then reached for the power lever. I hear you, Aunt Nora. He shut it down. For good. The red light faded to black. When they climbed back upstairs, dawn was beginning to break through the storm. The lodge was half buried in snow, its roof sagging under the weight. Mason set another log on the fire and sat beside it, Rook curling against his leg. Wind whistled through the cracks, but the silence inside felt clean, earned. Mason leaned back, pressing a hand over his ribs. Pain pulsed steady, but it meant he was alive. Rook rested his head on Mason's knee. His fur smelled of smoke and cold air. We're done, Mason said. No more ghosts. The dog's tail thumped once, slow, like punctuation. Outside, the storm eased to flakes drifting gently past the windows. The light turned gold through the glass. For the first time in a long while, the mountain felt quiet, not dead, just resting. Mason stood, walked to the doorway, and looked out across the white valley. The world looked clean again, as if all the noise had finally been swallowed. Behind him, Rook barked once a single sharp note, not warning but release. Mason turned, half smiling. Yeah, he said softly. We made it. He stepped outside into the snow, breath steaming in the cold morning air. The ridge shimmered faintly in sunlight. Somewhere deep beneath it, the last echo of the ghost frequency dissolved into silence. The storm passed by mid-morning. The world below Ridge B lay buried in white silence. Smoke rose faintly from what remained of the array, just twisted metal and frozen ash. Mason watched from the porch, one arm bound in torn cloth, the revolver lying disassembled on the railing. Rook sat beside him, still as a statue, eyes scanning the tree line. The dog had stopped trembling hours ago, but the vigilance never left. You're still on duty, Mason said softly. Rook's tail flicked once. The air was cold enough to bite skin, but clean, no hum, no signal, no whispers from below. The ghost frequency was finally gone. Mason took a slow breath, feeling his ribs protest. The pain grounded him. It reminded him that he'd lived through things he shouldn't have, that he wasn't just surviving anymore, he was deciding what came next. Near noon, headlights cut through the valley fog. 2 snowmobiles crawled up the hill, local deputies, one of them Sheriff Nolan. They dismounted near the porch, cautious, surveying the smoke trail from the ridge. Jesus, Cole, Nolan muttered. You lit half the mountain. Had to, Mason said. There was still a relay live. The sheriff's gaze dropped to Mason's arm, then to the quiet German shepherd at his side. That dog save your life again? Every time, Mason said. Nolan sighed, rubbing his jaw. Federal guys are inbound. They'll want statements. I already told them you were the one who stopped the leak. They're calling it containment. Not justice? The sheriff looked away. Justice doesn't keep the lights on. Mason didn't argue. He'd stopped expecting justice years ago. By afternoon, agents arrived, suits, radios, the hum of quiet authority. They swept the property, photographed everything, and took what remained of Whisper Nine's casing. Mason said little. He'd already written his statement on a single page. System neutralized. Operator deceased. No further transmission detected. When they asked about Nora's notes, he handed over only the burned pages. The rest, the true technical core, he'd hidden beneath the hearth earlier that morning. Some truths weren't meant to be filed. As the agents packed up, one of them stopped by the porch. "You'll get commendation for this, Mr. Cole. The department doesn't forget favors." Mason almost smiled. "That's what worries me." The man hesitated, then left. That night, Mason sat by the fire with Rook sleeping at his feet. The clock on the mantel had stopped at exactly 3:33, the last time the ghost frequency had pulsed. He stared at it for a while, wondering if silence could really stay. He reached into his pocket and pulled out Nora's compass, the one she'd given him before his first deployment. The needle spun lazily, then steadied north. "Guess we finally found our way," he said. Rook opened one eye, thumped his tail once. Up. The lights stuttered, alarms wailing. Mason crawled to the side panel, tearing out wires, searching for the master cutoff. He found it buried under layers of conduit, a red switch marked purge. Laird saw it too. They locked eyes. Both men lunged. The switch flipped. A surge of white light filled the hall. For an instant, everything froze. Time, sound, breath. Then the floor trembled. Monitors went black. The hum died. The ghost frequency stopped. The next morning dawned bright and sharp. Sunlight struck the ridge, glittering off ice like shards of glass. The snow around the lodge had hardened into crust, the kind that cracked softly underfoot. Mason stepped outside, coffee steaming in his hand. From here, he could see everything: the valley, the charred radio towers, the thin line of the coast beyond. He heard an engine behind him. By afternoon, agents arrived, suits, radios, the hum of quiet authority. They swept the property, photographed everything, and took what remained of Whisper Nine's casing. Mason said little. He'd already written his statement on a single page. System neutralized. Operator deceased. No further transmission detected. When they asked about Nora's notes, he handed over only the burned pages. The rest, the true technical core, he'd hidden beneath the hearth earlier that morning. A familiar voice called out, "You really don't know how to stay out of trouble, do you?" Leah Monroe climbed out of a county jeep, her hair tucked under a wool cap, cheeks pink from the cold. Mason blinked. "You shouldn't be here." "Neither should you," she said, smiling faintly. "Nolan called me, said the mountain's finally quiet. I wanted to see it." Rook trotted over, tail wagging. Leah knelt to scratch behind his ears. "Still watching him, huh?" "He watches everyone," Mason said. He nodded toward Rook. The dog barked once, sharp and certain, as if confirming the plan. Leah smiled. "He always did know when you were telling the truth." They spent the rest of the morning clearing debris from the porch and patching the broken shutters. Leah found an old journal beneath a fallen beam, Nora's handwriting across the cover. "What's buried only matters if it stays forgotten." Mason turned it over in his hands, reading the line twice. "She knew how this would end," he said. "She knew you'd come back," Leah replied. He didn't answer. Instead, he looked out toward the forest, the place where everything had begun. The next morning dawned bright and sharp. Sunlight struck the ridge, glittering off ice like shards of glass. The snow around the lodge had hardened into crust, the kind that cracked softly underfoot. Mason stepped outside, coffee steaming in his hand. From here, he could see everything: the valley, the charred radio towers, the thin line of the coast beyond. He heard an engine behind him. That night, the fire burned steady. Leah had fallen asleep on the couch, a blanket draped over her shoulders. Rook slept beside her, paws twitching in dream. Mason sat alone at the table, writing in a clean notebook. Some ghosts don't want to haunt. They just want to be remembered right. He closed the book and placed it beside Nora's compass. Outside, the mountains sighed under the cold. The wind carried no whispers, only the slow rhythm of falling snow, a new kind of signal, one that spoke not of command, but of peace. Winter loosened its grip by the end of March. The snow melted from the ridge in slow veins, revealing the earth underneath dark, alive, waiting. The lodge no longer looked haunted. The roof had been patched, windows refitted, and a new wooden sign hung above the door. Harris Haven, a place to begin again. The name wasn't Mason's idea. Sunlight filtered through branches, bright and new. Rook stood at the edge of the yard, staring down the path as if guarding something invisible. His ears twitched, then relaxed. For once, Mason didn't follow. He simply let the silence stay. By spring, the place had changed. Veterans from nearby counties came up on weekends, men and women who had nowhere else to go. Some still fighting wars no one could see. Mason didn't call it therapy. He called it work. He taught them to rebuild walls, fix radios, mend engines. Rook stayed close through it all, padding between them like a silent instructor, watching every motion. The dog had become a symbol before Mason realized it, his scars worn like medals, his patience wordless and steady. Sometimes newcomers arrived just to meet him. They'd crouch beside Rook, stroke the faded fur along his muzzle, and whisper, thanks for reasons Mason never asked to hear. In that quiet, healing happened. One afternoon, Leah stepped into the yard holding a small parcel wrapped in brown paper. Delivery came down from D.C., she said, addressed to you. Mason frowned. I'm not expecting anything. She handed it over. The return label bore no name, only a government seal. Inside, neatly folded, was a letter and an object wrapped in cloth. The letter read, Mr. Cole, after internal review, your role in the Ridge containment operation is recognized under declassified status. Enclosed is an artifact recovered from the Echo Array site. It may hold significance. Dep 2 of Defense Archives Division. Mason unwrapped the cloth. Inside lay a small metal plate burnt, half melted, but still legible. It read, Whisper 9 divided by transmission log, final. Below that, one line survived. Signal rerouted. Pinehaven. Mason's breath caught. He looked at Leah, then at Rook, lying by the porch, ears flicking. It's still alive, he murmured. Or maybe, Leah said softly, it just came home. He turned the plate over. Etched into the back, faint but visible, was a hand-signed note, Nora Harris. Trust the dog. Mason smiled, tired, genuine. Guess she meant it literally. That night, he sat alone by the radio table. The equipment was old but functional. He reconnected one wire, tuned the dial through static until it landed on a clear band, dead air. He hesitated, then pressed the transmit switch. Station Pinehaven, he said quietly. If anyone out there can hear this, the frequency's clear. You're safe to come home. No reply, only the soft crackle of snow against glass. But for Mason, that was enough. Silence wasn't emptiness anymore. It was peace, listening back. He switched off the radio and looked down. Rook had settled beside the chair, chin on his paw, watching him the way he always did, like a soldier waiting for the next order that might never come. Not tonight, Mason said. We're off duty. Rook's tail brushed once against the floor. Weeks passed. Spring deepened into early summer. The mountain turned green again. Mason found himself smiling easier, sleeping longer, talking more. Leah stayed, helping run the lodge, organizing supplies, laughing louder than the wind some nights. They never named what they were. They didn't have to. Their days were measured not in words, but in small, steady things. Shared coffee, fixed shutters, the sound of Rook's nails clicking across wood floors. Every evening at dusk, Mason and Rook walked the ridge path together. The same route they'd once taken under fire and storm now stretched quiet beneath gold light. On one such walk, Mason stopped at the overlook where the first signal tower had stood. Only scorched earth remained. He picked up a fragment of twisted metal and threw it into the wind. Good riddance, he said. Rook barked once, as if agreeing. Months later, a journalist from a Veterans Foundation visited the lodge. Her name was Sarah Lynn. She'd heard rumors about the man who silenced a secret and built a refuge in its place. Her questions were polite, her eyes curious. Do you ever miss the field? She asked. Mason shook his head. This is the field now. Fewer bullets. Same mission. And the dog? He's the real commander. Sarah laughed softly. I think you're right. She glanced around the room at the tools, the maps, the photographs of men and women, rebuilding pieces of their lives. You ever think of telling your story publicly? No, Mason said. Stories like this work better whispered. Later that night, when the guests were gone and the fire burned low, Mason turned on the radio one last time. Static filled the room, then faintly, impossibly, the pattern returned. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. He froze, staring at the dial. Then, through the hiss, a voice not Nora's, not Laird's, but his own, faintly echoed from a previous transmission. Station Pinehaven, frequency clear. The radio was replaying his words, looping them back. Rook looked up, tail wagging slowly. Mason smiled. Guess the mountain's sending one of its own now. He let the loop continue his message carried into the static, over and over, a beacon for anyone still listening in the dark. He reached down, scratching Rook's neck. We did it, partner. The ghosts are home. Outside, fireflies drifted above the grass, blinking in rhythm with the signal. The night was quiet, but alive, filled with the kind of silence that held stories instead of secrets. Mason leaned back in his chair, eyes half closed. The radio glowed steady beside him, its light warm and constant. For the first time in years, he wasn't waiting for orders. He was giving one to hope itself. Autumn returned to the ridge quietly, like a familiar breath. The air carried the scent of pine and cooling earth. Leaves drifted across the porch in small spirals of gold. The world had softened again, not erased, just calmer, older, content to remember without hurting. Mason sat on the same step where it all began. The morning sun touched the mountains in slow bands of amber light. Beside him, Rook rested his head on Mason's boot, eyes half closed, chest rising steady with each breath. The radio still sat on the windowsill, tuned to the same channel. Static hummed faintly. Nothing more. No hidden codes. No ghost frequency. Just the sound of air moving through wireproof that silence, too, could be alive. He'd kept the lodge open year-round now. Some nights, veterans still came up through the valley road, a few seeking company, a few just needing to sit beside the fire without explaining why. Mason never asked. He'd pour coffee, nod toward Rook, and let the quiet do the rest. Healing, he'd learned, was rarely loud. Leah stepped onto the porch, her hands wrapped around two mugs. "You've been out here since dawn," she said. "Couldn't sleep," Mason replied. "Too much peace. Feels unnatural." She smiled. "You'll adjust." He took the mug, the warmth seeping into his palms. They sat together in silence, watching light break over the ridge. The forest below shimmered with frost. Rook stirred, ears flicking at the sound of distant laughter workers fixing the fence by the trailhead. He stretched, stood, and trotted toward them, tail swaying lazily. Leah watched him go. "He's getting slower." "Still faster than me," Mason said. "But yeah, time's catching up." "Maybe that's the point," she murmured. "Everything that runs eventually rests." Mason nodded. Maybe. He looked at the horizon, where the fog from the valley rose like smoke from an old fire. "You ever think the ghosts finally stop talking when they know you're listening?" Leah looked at him for a long moment. "You didn't bury them, Mason. You gave them somewhere to stay." He smiled faintly. "Guess we both did." That evening, the wind shifted gentle, cool, carrying the scent of rain. The radio on the sill crackled once, then again. Mason looked up. The pattern was faint, almost playful. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. He laughed softly. "Old habits die hard." Leah looked up from her book. "What is it?" "Just the mountain saying goodnight." Rook lifted his head, tail thumping once, then laid it back down, content. Mason reached over and switched off the radio. The hum faded, replaced by the sound of the fire. For a moment, the lodge seemed to breathe with them, wood creaking, wind sighing through the eaves, the heartbeat of a place that had finally learned how to rest. He leaned back, eyes tracing the ceiling beams his hands had rebuilt. Every scar, every nail told its own truth, that survival was only half the story. Living was the rest. Outside, snow began to fall again, light as ash, slow as forgiveness. It blanketed the ground, the porch, the ridge, not hiding the past, but softening it. Mason watched it in silence, then whispered, "We made it home." Rook's tail brushed once against the floorboards, the sound small but sure, like punctuation at the end of a sentence long overdue. And when the wind finally settled, carrying that last echo into the trees, the mountain held its breath, not waiting for another war, but listening to peace.